Many targets of non-lethal microwave weapons attacks are also victims of organized stalking. Other related terms are gang stalking, mobbing, or street theater. The targets are victims of a sophisticated smear campaign designed to motivate the vigilantes. The political activists and whistleblower targets are depicted as criminals and undesirable elements who must be driven out of the community. The stalking game uses low-level attacks that are generally not against the law and difficult for the victims to describe to others. The attacks include strangers cursing the targets in public everywhere they go, bumping into them in person, on purpose on city streets, blocking maneuvers on sidewalks, strangers starting verbal arguments or even physical fights, forcing car wrecks, vandalism of cars and homes, systematic harassment at work, and noise campaigns, such as blasting loud music from a neighboring apartment or home, all night, every night. A symphony of attacks, often 10 or even 20 separate events a day, that in a few weeks' time pegs the stress level of the targets at an artificially high level. The victims are traumatized, they lose sleep, and at some point their work output and their physical energy drops to near zero. This strategy might be termed the death of 1,000 cuts. These tactics are similar to the Army's use of biscuit teams, an individually tailored campaign of psychological attack designed by a medical doctor, a psychologist, and an interrogation specialist to individually tailor a campaign targeting the victim's cultural and personality weaknesses. The biscuit teams are using many small stress factors piled one on top of the other, used over time, like extreme temperature of hot and cold, stress positions, constant light or dark to distort the time sense, sleep and sensory deprivation, continuous loud sound attacks, sexual humiliation, isolation, and constant physical threats to themselves or family members. These techniques slowly break down and psychologically destroy the subject without using torture in the traditional sense. The Russians use their mental health care facilities as a strategy to silence political dissidents. By the 1960s, the USSR was worried about world opinion and could no longer openly imprison political dissidents or kill them with impunity as they had traditionally done in the past. The Russian government instead used forced institutionalization of dissidents into mental institutions and forced them to take powerful experimental drugs to destroy them. A U.S. Army study in 1972 entitled Controlled Offensive Behavior, USSR, categorized all the potential types of non-traditional torture being used by the Soviets on their dissidents, including isolation, temperature, light, sound, sleep and sensory deprivation, and threats of violence and violence to the dissidents or their families. In addition, the Soviets studied the use of microwave weapons on dissidents, and even after they were forced into mental institutions, an electromagnetic weapon called the LIDA, L-I-D-A, was used to pacify the patients. These techniques and these weapons were used to break down Soviet dissidents in behavior modification experiments, purposefully turning them into psychiatric cases. The nearly 200-page Army study describes how experiments were used on the political dissidents to, quote, make them give their will over to some superior outside force. This description is very similar to descriptions of the experiences of the current victims of non-lethal microwave weapons attacks. These same techniques, described in the 1972 Army study, have now been adopted by the U.S. intelligence agencies in the War on Terror and in the secret dirty war using classified non-lethal weapons on activists and whistleblowers. It is inevitable that the current targets will be called crazy tinfoil hat people, and that this illegal program will be explained away as mass hysteria. This often happened to the 500,000 U.S. citizens used as human guinea pigs in the past. Operation COINTELPRO and MK Ultra on purpose used the strategy of making the targets look crazy as part of the strategy for keeping these illegal operations secret. The human radiation experiments began exposing thousands of unknowing Americans to harmful or even lethal levels of radiation in 1943 and continued well into the 1970s. The following is one man's story out of more than 500,000. In 1947, Mr. Elmer Allen was working as a Pullman porter when he injured his leg. He went to a San Francisco area hospital and was injected with plutonium in the left leg. The next day the leg was amputated. He told his best friend and his family doctor back home in Italy, Texas, that he thought that he had been used as a human guinea pig. His best friend didn't believe him and avoided him afterwards, and his family doctor classified him as a paranoid schizophrenic in his medical records. His family did not find out the truth until years after he died. In 1995, the government decided to go public and held hearings and issued a report, but no person or institution was punished. The government hearings functioned as a whitewash. COINTELPRO. The political activist targets of COINTELPRO were depicted as paranoid when they claimed the government was following them and systematically harassing them and sabotaging their lives. When anti-war activist Abbie Hoffman told members of the press and his family and friends that he was being targeted by the government, most of them refused to believe him and avoided him. It was only when friends of Hoffman broke into FBI offices and stole government documents that proved that the FBI was spending nearly 40% of its time and resources on COINTELPRO. It was only then that some members of the press began to believe Hoffman. MK Ultra. MK Ultra was investigated by Congress, but the investigation narrowed its focus to the use of LSD on unknowing victims, and the true scope of illegal programs was never made public. The survivors still live in fear in the shadows even today. If a victim tells a doctor or therapist that as children they were drugged and tortured in government labs and behavior modification experiments to purposefully induce multiple personality disorder, then they will be permanently classified as paranoid schizophrenics in their medical records. They have learned not to admit this to anyone. This functions today as a means of keeping the worst aspects of MK Ultra a secret. Some survivors report getting threats and harassment when they attempt to give public testimony. MK Ultra was designed and run by government-funded psychiatrists who published false information to the effect that there is no such thing as multiple personality disorder and related phenomena. These psychiatrists were often the most powerful and influential men in their field, including such men as Dr. Ewan Cameron and Dr. Martin T. Orne. MK Ultra and COINTELPRO have evolved into the current program that I call Monarch, a program of microwave weapons torture and organized stalking.